Are preteens vanishing? Not quite literally, because it's not like they all woke up in the middle of the night at 2:17 a.m. and left to go into the dark.
This is a true story.
But anyways, there's no denying that when we were all children, there was this desire to want to be older, and popular media has always depicted this sort of idea. We see this in a movie like 13 Going on 30, where we follow Jennifer Garner as she quite literally transforms from a 13-year-old girl to a full-fledged 30-year-old adult woman. Nowadays, with the prevalence of social media, the rate at which children have access to streams of content is pretty much limitless. But in the sea of content, are the days where traditional tween media reigns supreme something of the past? Well, it might seem that way. In today's video, we'll be analyzing the vanishing demographic of the tween and how the death of cable TV and the rise of social media contributed to this. Also, welcome if you are new here. My name is Malaya. Glad you could make it. And let's get to figuring out first, what exactly is a tween? According to parents.com, the tween years, often referred to as early adolescence, happens between 8 to 12 years old, though experts also believe this phase lives between 10 to 13-year-olds. During this period, children experience physical and mental changes, with this transitionary phase being a period where a tween's behavior and thinking is largely influenced by peer pressure, risk-taking, and concerns on their body, image, size, and gender. This time period almost feels like you're in a liminal space because you are in this very odd in-between area where you're growing out of being a child, but you're also not considered to be a teenager quite yet. However, it does feel like kids nowadays really aren't experiencing the rates of cringe that we might have had when we were their age. In early 2024, we all got to see firsthand the epidemic of the newly reimagined tween demographic, who were evidently flooding makeup stores like Sephora, and people brought up this idea of setting an age restriction on places like Sephora and Ulta, because when I tell you, these preteens were making quite the mess and wreaking a lot of havoc. From the skincare smoothies to employee anecdotes about these young girls' attitudes, it was a whole frenzy. But what this reveals is the vanishing middle that was once the awkward preteen years. Content, undoubtedly, is king nowadays, and when a majority of our youth is consuming media largely on social media platforms created mainly by teenagers and creators in their 20s, they're gonna want to emulate this exact aesthetic. For instance, Livia Lakmara wrote about this in the Pitt News in an opinion piece titled "Social Media is Eliminating the Awkward Preteen Years," and how younger kids nowadays look much different than when she was that age. Back in middle school, she recalls rocking sequined t-shirts, ill-fitting jeans, and bright lime green Skechers. Compare that to today's tweens, where their style consists of things like crop tops, branded Lululemon clothing, and expensive skincare and makeup products. Back when I was a preteen, I remember getting hand-me-downs from my sister, but even then, we had tween-specific stores like Justice, Limited 2, and Claire's that were catered to my demographic at the time. Now, these stores aren't doing so hot. They've pretty much plummeted in popularity, and part of the parent company Tween Brands Limited 2 rebranded to integrate into Justice, but later in 2020, Justice would file for bankruptcy. This led all physical locations to permanently close, though Justice is now being sold exclusively at Walmart. As for Claire's, they filed for bankruptcy the second time this August 2025. The downfall of these stores is indeed very indicative of the decrease in representation for tween fashion and apparel. But perhaps one of the best examples that highlights the vanishing preteen demographic is a child like Northwest. At 12 years old, she has a very unfathomable life for a child. She's the celebrity child of Kim Kardashian and Kanye West, where she's been given access to so much money, resources, and connections. North has attended events like Paris Fashion Week and has millions of TikTok followers, and she's styled almost like a miniature adult. While Kim has faced a bit of scrutiny for North's age inappropriate clothing choices, it does raise the question of what exactly are age appropriate tween alternatives. Around the time when I was her age, characters like Gabriella from High School Musical was throwing down serious looks, as well as Sharpay. Theirs were outfits that were aspirational, but still within the realm of tween fashion. Tweens these days, like Northwest, don't really have figures like that anymore. The Disney Channel stars who were so prominent during our time don't exist anymore and aren't being manufactured like they once were. And yes, I won't discredit figures like Olivia Rodrigo and Sabrina Carpenter, but these are only two of the most prominent figures that have come out of Disney in the past couple years, and even now they've pretty much matured past their Disney days to move on to more mature content. A tween like North looks to someone who's readily available, and these are influencers in their teens and 20s and high fashion models. Since she has all of these resources and the platform, she becomes like a mini influencer herself, who sets trends for other preteens that want to emulate her mature style. Now, the true criticism isn't all about North, but more so a cultural infrastructure that has failed to hold space for preteens like her the chance to be a preteen. Let's discuss the importance of how the loss of tween-centered media contributed to the downfall of this once flourishing demographic. The golden era of tween media really came about with the unspoken feud between Nickelodeon and Disney Channel, and you can even toss in Cartoon Network in there, but I feel like Cartoon Network pretty much stayed in their own lane. For Nickelodeon, they officially launched in February 1978 and quickly positioned themselves as the first ever children's network. Their logo would change throughout the years, but became memorable once they rebranded with their iconic orange blob that remained their logo for over 20 years. This direction can be credited to Geraldine Laybourne, who became the Nickelodeon's president in 1984. When she took this position, she really prioritized children's desires by conducting focus groups to find out exactly how they felt. The children had expressed that the media made for them lacked fun and they weren't as engaged. For some of the kids, they felt alienated, isolated, and depressed due to the bombardment of anti-drug ads or fear-mongering commercials such as child abductions. Simply put, they wanted TV shows that displayed a realistic portrayal of what it meant to be a kid. So Nickelodeon leaned heavy on curating a space that was a quote kids-only zone where the kids were the stars of the show. 90s sitcom like The Adventures of Pete and Pete and Clarissa Explains It All featured humorous characters whose perspectives represented the uncharted territory of what it meant to be a tween that addressed their unique developmental stage of identity formation and navigating peer relations. Nickelodeon had solidified itself as the place to tune in and pioneered the way for tween-led media. The tween entertainment space had a unique positioning in the industry. They were different from the childish antics in cartoons like Rugrats or Doug, but they didn't contain such mature, explicit themes like in MTV's Daria or Beavis and Butthead. Because of Nickelodeon's ability to recognize this untapped source material, they became top in children's and tweens cable TV. However, this now meant that Disney was in trouble and they had fierce competition. Known as the Disney Channel at the time, they launched in 1997, but their network didn't generate the same amount of buzz as their animated movies did or their theme parks. Former Disney CEO Michael Eisner stated in the mid-90s, "I don't understand why this Nickelodeon is so popular." Things seriously needed to change for the network. Disney Channel was struggling until they had former Nickelodeon executives such as Geraldine Laybourne and Anne Sweeney, who who completely revamped the network for the better. Laybourne, along with her former Nickelodeon executive VP Sweeney, were swift to remove the from the Disney Channel to simply Disney Channel in 1997, expressing that they didn't want to be held in the same regard as networks like the History Channel or the Travel Channel. Suddenly, tons of experienced sitcom writers, directors, crew, and wardrobe came flocking to Disney for work. That's So Raven writer Michael Carrington discussed the challenge of adapting adult comedy for tween audiences, and in the book Disney High, the Untold Story of the Rise and Fall of Disney Channel's tween empire, he described how the writer's room would take inappropriate weekend anecdotes and brainstorm ways to make them age appropriate by replacing adult elements with kid-friendly alternatives. He stated, "The reason for the success of these shows, in my opinion, is because we were all veteran sitcom writers. We weren't children's writers. Because all of the networks gave up on us, it was Disney Channel's game. They got lucky." Of course, Disney Channel had their string of 90s sitcoms, from the experimental So Weird to the beloved Even Stevens, but it was truly the introduction of Lizzie McGuire that would change everything for how the network approached their strategy. Now, things were looking pretty good for the series, and by its second season, Lizzie McGuire had reached astronomical heights by averaging 2.3 million viewers per episode, being the most watched show on the channel. They sure as hell made a lot of money off of this show, with Lizzie branded books, sleeping bags, stationery, and apparel lines with Kohl's and Limited too. The demand for Hilary Duff blew up and even helped launch her own music career outside of Disney. Now, Disney Channel gained the power to become a real star maker after the popularity of this show. Once they found a recipe that they could imitate, they continued to drop a slew of serialized shows like That's So Raven, featuring the ever vivacious Raven Baxter, to the quirky Miley Stewart and Hannah Montana, and the slick, sarcastic Alex Russo in Wizards of Waverly Place, all with funny, lovable female leads. And when preteen boys revealed to be a pretty hard demographic to come by, they launched Sweet Life of Zack and Cody and Disney XD to target boys age 6 to 14. But what really catapulted Disney Channel to earn respect was its DCOM hit High School Musical. DCOM, which stood for Disney Channel Original Movie, came to fruition around the time that Anne Sweeney started her role as the Disney Channel president in 1996, when research showed 11 to 12-year-olds weren't quite ready to consume content from MTV, nor were they brave enough to spend their weekends out about with their peers yet.
I look at Disney as a terrific example of really focusing in on what's going on with 2 to 5-year-olds, with 6 to 11-year-olds, and most recently with tweens. These 11 to 14-year-olds. Tweens.
That's a new word for me.
I have a tween in my house,
Yeah.
and I have one that's becoming a tween. But this group of kids who have 1 foot in childhood and
Yeah.
1 foot in teenagehood,
Yeah.
and figuring out entertainment for all of these different age groups has been an amazing challenge, but a great opportunity.
DCOMs were created as a fun weekend watch and became a more convenient activity than the typical family outing to, say, the local movie theater. These tweens were given something to look forward to in the safety of their homes. In her book Disney High, Ashley Spencer discusses the success of these DCOMs, stating, "Unlike the network's previous generation of Disney Channel premiere films, which varied in style and tone, the Disney Channel original movies soon fell into a cohesive identity. Their stories featured an abundance of heartfelt family and friendship moments." The premise of High School Musical featured a Romeo and Juliet-esque love story between a basketball player with big dreams of singing, coupled with the beautiful brainiac that defied expectations. The DCOM High School Musical would go on to win 2 Emmys in 2006 for the Outstanding Children's Programming category, along with Outstanding Choreography. And after a standout reception from a previous Cheetah Girls Christmas tour, the High School Musical, the concert, was set in motion, which took the cast across the US and South America, with arenas that were sold out, filled with crowds of excited kids, tweens, and compliant parents in between. Children entertainment was booming, so much so that it became pretty stiff competition for the parents of Hollywood to snag access to red carpet premieres from High School Musical 2, Nancy Drew, and even tickets to Hannah Montana's live concert tour. And safe to say, many of the famous celebrities that we know today got their start from Disney Channel and were lamented as preteen stars, but nowadays these kinds of stars just aren't being created and propped up anymore. We had it pretty good in the day, and the Disney executives were definitely making these kids work overtime, especially with all the content that had been produced. We had crossovers like That's So Sweet Life of Hannah Montana and Wizards on Deck with Hannah Montana to High School Musical dance-alongs. These were shared memories and viewing experiences we had when we were young, and it was such a carefree, wholesome time to be alive. Disney Channel had occupied a space in the cultural zeitgeist. There was a South Park episode making fun of the Jonas Brothers' purity rings, to Eminem's mention of watching Hannah Montana in his 3 a.m. song. But gone are the days where Disney Channel was as culturally relevant as it was in its heyday. Though Disney Channel still exists today, priority has shifted from their streaming platform, Disney Plus, marking the inevitable downfall of cable TV. What I especially enjoyed about what Disney had done with their shows was the mature themes they had implemented into their shows. When I was a preteen, I remember the episode True Colors from That's a Raven that addressed a racist retail manager that refused to give Raven a job due to her being black. Similarly, in Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, there was an episode called Health and Fitness where we followed London and Maddie, who both experienced 2 differing sides of body dysmorphia in preparation for a fashion show that they were partaking in. Disney shows tackled serious issues like racism and body image in ways that felt age appropriate and educational. When a platform like TikTok or Instagram has taken over the likes of these tweens' lives, what valuable lessons are they learning besides content that pushes for consumerism? Another lost artifact that I think tweens nowadays will never come to appreciate are the tween magazines. It was definitely a core memory for me as a kid that while going on a Walgreens run with my mom, I would venture out to the magazine aisle, which were flooded with all of the tween magazines like Tiger Beat, Bop, J14, and Girl Talk were enough to entertain me as my mom shopped around the store. Flipping through the pages, I was suddenly thrown into the world of tween culture, like which of the Disney girls were dating a Jonas brother, and there were even fun personality quizzes and compatibility tests, like to find out which One Direction boy I was best suited to. Basically, these magazines were like tweenhood Bibles that provided age-appropriate advice, fun trivia, and had all of the tween stars in big posters that you could think of. The sensory experience of physical media at these stores was also a sort of ritual. There was this component of parental gatekeeping where you had to ask your parent for permission to even buy these magazines. And creating these magazines was also a carefully curated art by magazine editors with a sort of editorial lens that ensured that the page contents were developmentally suitable. Also, a magazine can only hold so many pages, and there was that inevitable flip to the last page. Compare this with the endless doom scroll of our algorithms, and the boundaries are limitless. Surely apps have to monitor who is on their platforms, so anybody that they deem is too young isn't allowed, but these rules are almost always broken. For instance, Insider Intelligence uncovered that over 2% of TikTok's users are 11 years and younger, though the minimum age requirement for the app is actually 13 years old. In hindsight, 2% doesn't sound like a lot, but when you factor in the fact that there were over 1 billion users on that app worldwide, that 2% roughly translates to 25 million individuals who are age 11 years old and younger on a platform like TikTok. My generation experienced what was likely the final golden age of intentionally crafted tween media, a brief window in time where entertainment executives genuinely understood and catered to this developmental stage. From the rise of Nickelodeon and the Disney Channel's rebrand, there existed an infrastructure dedicated to this demographic alone. When the streaming boom came in the late 2000s, these platforms were clever in using algorithm-driven recommendations, but often skipped the tween category entirely, pushing tweens towards either children's content or teen/adult content. There's really no middle ground because algorithms optimize for engagement metrics, not developmental appropriateness. Netflix might suggest something like Stranger Things or Peppa Pig, but where is the Lizzie McGuire equivalent? Similarly, social media also doesn't recognize for this tween as a meaningful category. TikTok's For You page doesn't even want to differentiate between what a 12-year-old sees versus what a 22-year-old sees, because the algorithm keeps track of what keeps you scrolling to keep coming back for more. What made tween media so valuable wasn't just entertainment, but it was the creation of these cultural spaces to just be awkward. These sitcoms and magazines were contained ecosystems where fumbling through adolescence wasn't just acceptable, but it was even accepted. Nostalgia is indeed a very powerful tool, and it's very tempting to want to romanticize our own tween years and dismiss today's generation as something lesser. But the structural changes are pretty undeniable. Could a heyday return? Perhaps, but I think it would require very intentional intervention. Streaming devices could create dedicated tween sections with curated content. Brands could also recognize the existence of this demographic and their specific needs. Or perhaps a nostalgic-driven movement needs to happen for my generation as Gen Zers will inevitably become parents ourselves, for those of whom want to become parents. And when 10-year-olds nowadays are building Sephora hauls and consuming content designed for adults, they've skipped that developmental stage that served an important purpose where they didn't have to grow up so fast. We got to be tweens. We got Hannah Montana and Limited 2 and Tiger Beat magazine. We got to be cringe, but we were free. Maybe the question isn't whether or not those days will entirely return, but whether new spaces can be created once again to serve that same function for the next generation, though it might look different from what we might have had when we were their age. Alright, that is it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear all of your comments, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, cool cats.